Once upon a time, oh, 1,000 years ago, I've heard of it. There lived a man on the west coast of Norway. His name was Floki Valgeirson. Floki was a farmer, yes, but he was also a merchant, and he traded um, up and down the coast of Norway and across uh, Shetland, Orkney, Western Isles, sometimes as far down as Dublin. Um, he was also a bit of an adventurer. He liked to go new places. He liked to see new things. He liked to open up new markets for trade. Now, one early spring, he heard about the new land that had been sighted far to the north. Wasn't aware that anybody had visited it, but it had been seen on the horizon by ships blown off course. So Floki decided that he would maybe go on a trip to see if he could discover this land. And he took his ship, he took his crew, and he also took his 11-year-old daughter, Gerhilda. Gerhilda was the thing in life he cared about most. Her mother had died when she was a baby. And she went everywhere with him. No school in those days. So when he left home, she went on his ship with him. And so they took the ship and they took trade goods and they took food and water and they sailed across and they stopped off in Shetland first and foremost. And they came into Catford and they anchored the ship and came ashore. And Floki sent men to fill up barrels of fresh water, nice burden there that they could get water from. And he and the rest of the men decided to go and look at the cliffs to see if there was any seabed dikes, because seabed dikes was a good source of food when you were on a voyage to Cape Cod. So they went along the cliffs and they gathered quite a few eggs. They had to climb down, put the eggs in a bag, and climb back up again every time they spotted an egg. Eventually, one of the men came and said to Floki, "Oh, we found the nest, but it hasn't got any eggs in it, but it's got 4 young ravens." Now, any sensible Viking knows that you don't mess around with ravens. Odin has 2 ravens that are his messengers on Earth, Hugin and Munin. And they fly around and they fly back up to Asgard and they tell Odin what's going on. So Ravens are under Odin's protection. So you leave them alone. But Floki was a kind of rash individual and he didn't care much for the god. So he climbed down the cliff and he took the 4 young ravens and he put them into his bag and he set off back for the ship. As they were going back, the mother raven appeared and she followed them the whole way back to the ship. And then she perched on top of the mast until it got dark and she flew away. The next day, Floki decided to go and do some trading in a nearby village. And because that sometimes wasn't all that safe, he decided to leave little Gerhilda at the ship with a couple of men to look after her. But he went away and he had a very successful day's trading and came back in a really good mood. And the men he'd left looking after Gerhilda were in an absolute panic. They'd lost her, couldn't find her, looked all over the place, no signs of little Gerda. Just as Floki was beginning to organise his men to go and do a wider search, the raven appeared again. And she flew down and she perched on a rock. And she cocked her head and she looked at Floki with one big black eye. And for some reason, this absolutely enraged him. And he picked up his axe and he ran after the dog. And the raven flew off, but she didn't fly very fast. She only flew a few yards and then she stopped. And Floki chased her again and she flew a few more yards and stopped. And this went on until they got to the top of a nearby hill. Spread out below Floki was a valley that went the whole way through to the sea on the far side of the ship. Immediately below him was a loch with an island in the middle. But that wasn't what caught his attention. The first thing that he spotted was a patch of reed in the middle of the loch. And he knew that little Gerhilda had been wearing a reed dress that morning. So he ran down the hill and he plunged into the loch, but he was too late. The patch of reed was Gerhilda's dress, and she drowned. The mother raven had had her revenge. Floki buried little Gerhilda in the island in the loch. And he named the loch after her. He called it Gerhilda's father. Nowadays, that name has been corrupted and we call it Gerstloch. The island is still there, whether little Gerhilda is on the island, nobody knows. This isn't the end of Floki's story, however. He carried on with his voyage. He and his crew sailed north from Shetland. They stopped off in Faroe again for fresh water, fresh food. And then they sailed off into the unknown. Because at this time, nothing beyond Faroe had been discovered. And they sailed for a whole day, and at the end of the day, Floki took one of the young ravens, and he let it go. And the raven flew up, and it flew 3 times around the top of his mast, and then it flew southwards back towards Faroe again. Floki sailed on all night, all the next day. Then he let go a second young raven. Same thing, it flew up 3 times at the top of the mast, back southwards towards Faroe. The same happened the next day with the third raven. By this time, Floki's men were getting very, very frightened. Remember, they thought the world was flat and that they could sail off the edge, and this is what they thought was going to happen. But Floki pressed on. At the end of the 4th day, he let go the last raven. The raven flew up, and it flew 3 times at the masthead, but this time it flew northwards instead of southwards. You see, Floki might have been a rash man, but he was a very clever man as well. And he knew that a young raven could see further from the top of his mast that he could from the deck of his ship, and that the raven had spotted land to the north and was flying towards it. And Floki followed the bird and found land. And he and his men went ashore, and it was a beautiful land. The days were long. There were lush river valleys full of grass. There were rivers full of salmon, and the sea was absolutely full of fish. It was a rich land. And he and his men spent the whole summer there. They constructed dwellings for themselves. He thought this might be a good place to settle. But he delayed too long, and before long, the wind started to rise, and the rain came, and following the rain came the snow, and following it all came the ice. And the land froze, and the rivers froze, and eventually even the sea froze. And Floki and his men were trapped. By the end of the winter, probably half of his men had died of starvation. When spring came, he took an opportunity to go up the nearest mountain and look out to see if the sea was clear. And it was. But when he turned and gazed into the north, all that he could see was miles and miles and miles of solid ice. So he and his men took the ship and they escaped and they made it back to Norway. And Floki told people about this land that he discovered. He told people about the summers, and he told people about the great river valleys, and the rivers full of salmon, and the sea full of fish. And he and a number of other men went back to settle that. And they gave it the name that it bears to this day. And that was Iceland. Now, it's a great story, and it's a story that all our Scandinavian friends like, because it ties Norway, Faroe, Shetland, Iceland all together. It's one of these stories that may have a basis in fact, and I think it does. The Icelanders believe it implicitly because in Iceland there is a manuscript called the Landsnamabók, which lists the names of all of the original settlers of Iceland. Some Icelanders will tell you that you're not a real Icelander unless you've got an ancestor in the Landsnamabók. And one of the settlers of Iceland, the original one, says Floki Valkeirsson. But the reason that the Icelanders all believe the story of the ravens is that Floki's name also has a nickname attached to it in the Landsnamabók. He's called Hrafn Floki, which means in Icelandic, Floki of the Raven. And that's why I think that this story is probably a true story. And that is the story, my friends, of Floki the Raven.